Good morning. I'm Grace Greger, a member of the trustees. We're glad you're with us online, as I suspect a number of us are online on this day of an almost snowstorm, or in person here in our magnificent sanctuary. Special welcome to visitors. If you've wandered in from the snow, in town for a conference, or in anticipation of Valentine's Day, we welcome you. To learn more about First Church Boston or Unitarian Universalism, please visit firstchurchboston.org or speak with Reverend Stephanie after church. Today's a special day for First Church because we have Reverend Mary Margaret Earl, Senior Minister and Executive Director of the UU Urban Ministry, located in John Elliott Square in the heart of Roxbury, just minutes from the Silver Line, Nubian Square, or from Roxbury Crossing. I want you to know how close it is. As is our tradition with partnering organizations, we'll share the proceeds of the plate collection with the Urban Ministry. And after church, I encourage you to visit the table in the narthex to learn more about this excellent UU ministry established in 1826. Next Sunday, February 16th, after church, we'll hold an artist talk with Alex Khalil. He's the artist whose powerful quilts have graced the narthex for the last few months. And lastly, for today, save the date. We'll have this in color next week. Save the date. This is the potluck on March 1st. I guess it's in the auditorium. And you know a potluck. This is the kickoff for our canvas, Connect, Revel, and Renew. And there'll be a sign up for the potluck. It's online now, and you can see the QR code to sign up. And next week, we'll have a sign up in the narthex for you. But save the date, most important thing to do now. And thank you again. We're glad you could join us today, or we're glad you're watching us on YouTube.
I read that the insect kingdom is collapsing, that the dense eastern woods have been beaten back and defeated. The lawns, endless seas of lawn, are sprayed and pressed into obedience, all real buzzing, bursting, impertinent life stilled into a stretch of green carpet. The bulldozers clear the trees and fill in the ponds, and the frogs fall silent. Lights along the highway, lights in backyards, lights everywhere, blind nighttime scavengers, confuse migrating birds. The moths seek the moon and exhaust themselves at street lamps. Fireflies flicker out. I read that the living world is flickering out. And so I rise in the morning, I fill the bird bath with fresh water. I rise in the morning and take a slender shovel and make space for a handful of goldenrod. I let the milkweed grow and open and surprise me with her purple flowers, her glorious blossoms, when once I did not even know that milkweed eventually blooms if you let her. Yesterday, I watched a swallowtail butterfly dance on the bee balm. There is no way to describe it except as a dance of joy. I read that maybe the world will collapse. I rise in the morning, and like the leaf that curves at the edge of despair into song, I plant something, a handful of goldenrod. I do sing. This is how I save myself. This is how we save ourselves. We sing. We plant something. We love something. We rise in the morning and begin again.
I'm the Reverend Dr. Stephanie May. I invite you to please rise in body or in spirit as we light our chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism, to remind us of our connections to all those other congregations meeting, whether it's sunny Hawaii or snowy New England. Let us say together the words of our affirmation, which we say every week to remind ourselves of why we're here and why we gather. Let us say, love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Please take a moment to greet one another and to wave to our camera by the clock for all of our friends online. If you want to remain standing, we will have our opening hymn is For the Beauty of the Earth, which in my head is For the Beauty of the Snowy Earth, which it is gorgeous outside. So please join in singing. We may be fewer in numbers, both in the congregation and the choir today, but I have faith in us that this is a familiar hymn for many of us. Let us sing out. So, as many of you may know, February is Black History Month, and here at First Church, some of our core values are pluralism and equity and diversity. And so in celebration of Black History Month, I wanted to read this book, lightly edited, Because of You, John Lewis, by Andrea Davis Pinkney, illustrated by Keith Henry Brown. This is Tybrie Fall. He wakes with a dream that sets the sky in motion. Tybrie whispers his wish. I want to meet John Lewis. I want to shake his hand. I want to tell that congressman exactly who I am. Me, Tybrie, that beautiful name sings with the music of possibility. When you're a kid from Johnson City, Tennessee, home to the Tweetsie Trail and a lake called Boone, when you're a kid growing up in the days of Black Lives Matter, you know the power of hope that glistens at sunrise. Tybrie's grandmothers know it too. They pour all their hopes into that child's future. In their eyes, he is the light that shines on tomorrow while his brilliance flickers today. When Tybrie first discovers his hero, John Robert Lewis, friend of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., it lights his dream on fire. He wants to know the man who stands for peace and love and truth. Then from the pages spring the words that put wings on Tybrie's wish. John Lewis, all about equality. John Lewis, unstoppable and brave. John Lewis marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, helped lead 600 people in the fight for voting rights, risked his life on the day we now know as Bloody Sunday, 1965, makes that same journey year on year, keeping the memory alive. Tybrie Faw reads and wants and waits. He has caught the fire of Martin and John. Tybrie reads it in history books. John Lewis got the nickname Good Trouble on account of speaking out for what is right. Tybrie reads about John Lewis at lunch counter sit-ins and freedom rides and in registering people to vote. He reads it in the newspaper. John Lewis brought his own kind of bold to the House of Representatives. Every time Tybrie reads, he bookmarks, underlines, folds back, keeps track of anything to do with where and when of the unstoppable Congressman John. Then comes the day. Tybrie convinces his grandmothers to pack up their car, fill its tank, stuff the back seat with a snack box and books, and make the 400-mile drive from Johnson City, Tennessee to Selma, Alabama, where his hero will be making that once-a-year march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Tybrie, bold. Tybrie, more ready than ever. Tybrie, wide awake. During the 7-hour car trip to Selma, where John Lewis, the congressman, prepares for his memory march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Tybrie waits at the back door of the church, hoping to meet the fighting for freedom, peace-seeking giant Congressman John. Tybrie wishes, Tybrie prays, Tybrie stays, stands straight and proud, heart beating loud, hours and hours and hours. Pressed shirt, necktie, new shoes laced tight, holding his sign of the times. Thank you, Representative John Lewis. You have shown me how to have courage. Then, can it really be? Yes, here, really here, a beautiful miracle, good trouble. Shake, shake, shaking. Tybrie Faw is shaking John Lewis's hand. They talk, they hug. Tybrie trembles from the deep down knowing that his dream has come true. Right then at that spot, Congressman John invites Tybrie, who has come all the way from Tennessee, to make that trip across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, walking next to him. I like that story. The book goes into also the relationship, the friendship between John Lewis and Martin Luther King, and making the sense of the friendships that we build in the work for justice through different generations. And I just think it's such a great reminder that as we continue the work of justice in our own moment, that building relationships such as First Church with the Urban Ministry and personally with other people that you might know, and being inspired by others who have done this work before us can help sustain us through these times.
While my small but mighty choir is getting up to sing for you this morning, since we are not able to do the piece we had originally intended to do, I chose a piece. It was a hymn, and as you know, a hymn is a poem, not necessarily music. It was a hymn that won the Jubilate's Hymns of Peace competition in 2018 and was to mark the centenary of Armistice Day and First World War. We didn't have a chance to get the words in to you, so I'm just going to read the last verse. There are 5 of them. It's to the famous tune of Love Unknown. My song is Love Unknown, which is beloved in the Anglican tradition, John Ireland being a wonderful English composer. Love for the human heart when hate grows from our fears and inwardly we start to turn our plows to spears. Help us to sow love's precious seed in word and deed that peace may grow. We can all get into some good trouble to make sure this happens.
Now is the time in our service that we gather and center ourselves, joining in prayer, stillness, and then a musical meditation. I invite you to join with me in breathing in, settling into your seat, coming fully into this moment, the only moment that we need tend to. Creative presence, ever moving, shaping snowflakes and the curve of tree branches, making and remaking, moving through us now in every breath, present and ready, perched at the edge of each intention. We come in heavy times. We carry the weight of worry. We are weighed down by swift-moving news and loud clamor that sits in our hearts, weighs on our minds. And in the midst of this, we carry too our own personal worries: health, family, friends, community. All of this we lift up, opening them to an infinite reservoir of hope, of creating new solutions, reminded in this moment that nothing is ever closed, that possibility is always around us, able to be birthed in and among us if we quiet ourselves. When we still ourselves and our minds, as we open slowly and wait, breathing in and breathing out, we open ourselves. Breathing in and out, we open to the aliveness that is here and within us. We enter together into a moment of shared silence. Amen.
As Grace mentioned at the top of the hour, our offering today will be given to the UU Urban Ministry. As a congregation, we have a number of community partners, a handful of community partners, and the UU Urban Ministry has been identified as one of those. And if I have my history correct, I believe we've probably been affiliated since the beginning in 1826. I know that over last summer I read a sermon given by Rufus Ellis, one-time minister here, in the 1860s to what was then known as the Benevolent Fraternity. And so we have a deep, deep history with this important work in the city under our shared faith. And so I encourage you to give generously as you're able. And I also want to just take this moment to acknowledge we have a handful of folks that are walking today at the Winter Walk on Boston Common that's happening right now. And that is raising funds for a whole bunch of organizations within the city and across the Commonwealth that support the unhoused and the homeless. And so lots of good work going for the city today. So thank you for giving as you're able, and thanks to those who gave to Winter Walk in advance of today's walk.
morning. This morning's reading is some excerpts from The Sum of Us, What Racism Cost Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGee. The American landscape was once graced with resplendent swimming pools, some big enough to hold thousands of swimmers at a time. In the 1920s, towns and cities tried to outdo one another by building the most elaborate pools. In the 30s, the Works Progress Administration, dear old WPA, put people to work building hundreds more. By World War II, the country's 2,000 pools were glittering symbols of a new commitment by local officials to the quality of life for their residents, allowing tens of thousands of people to socialize together for free. By the 1950s, the fight to integrate America's prized public swimming pools would demonstrate the limits of white commitment to public goods. In Montgomery, Alabama, the Oak Park Pool was the grandest one for miles, the crown jewel of the Parks Department, that also included a zoo, a community center, and a dozen other public parks. Dorothy Moore was a white teenage lifeguard when a federal court deemed the town's segregated recreation unconstitutional. Suddenly, black children would be able to wade into the deep end with white children at the Oak Park Pool. At the rec center, black elders would get chairs at the card tables. The reaction of the city council was swift. Effective January 1, 1959, the Parks Department would be no more. The council decided to drain the pool rather than share it with their black neighbors. Of course, the decision meant that white families lost a public resource as well. It was miserable, Mrs. Moore told a reporter 5 decades later. Uncomprehended white children cried as the city contractors poured dirt in the pool, paved it over, seeded it with grass, was green by the time the summer came along. To defy desegregation, Montgomery would go on to close every single public park and padlock the doors of the community center. It even sold off the animals in the zoo. The entire public park system would stay closed for over a decade. Even after it reopened, they never rebuilt the pool. Today, we don't even notice the absence of the grand pools in our communities, where grass grows over former sites. There are no plaques to tell the story of how racism drained the pools. But the spirit that drained these public goods lives on. The impulse now manifests in a subtler fashion, more often in a pool of public resources than a literal one. A sad tale.
Good morning. It is lovely to be back at First Church, and I want to thank my very dear and beloved colleague, the Reverend Dr. Stephanie May, for welcoming me back today, and for the worship team, the music, the choir, everyone who's coordinated this morning. My colleague Maggie is here with me. Where's Maggie? Maggie's back there. You'll see her in social hour afterwards. She'll be there with all kinds of information should you want to get more involved or learn more about our work after the service. As you heard, First Church is one of 46 Unitarian Universalist congregations around Greater Boston that are connected to the work of the UU Urban Ministry as members. And the Urban Ministry, as you heard, was founded nearly 200 years ago by a Unitarian minister who was striving for social justice in Boston with the combined power of Unitarian congregations. And congregations like First Church continue to play an important role in our work to dismantle racism and to advance racial, social, and economic justice in Boston. Today, we have a youth program that serves BIPOC students from Boston. We have a domestic violence shelter that serves families who are rebuilding their lives. And we partner with Roxbury businesses and nonprofits, bringing congregations and the Roxbury community together for change. Our First Church delegates are Grace Greger, who's also a former board member of the UU Urban Ministry, and Reverend Stephanie. They work to connect us by sharing information back and forth, and I thank them for their service. Reverend Stephanie also serves on our Congregational Engagement Task Force, whose charge is expanding member congregations' ability to help achieve our mission for racial justice. Our history together is deep, including that the Reverend Reese Williams, who also was Welsh, as I am. That's not part of our connection. My brother's name is Reese, so that's a connection. Reverend Reese Williams served as our board president when we were known as the Benevolent Fraternity of Unitarian Churches. Some of the ways you support us has been through the John Clark Fund, through the South Friendly Society. They've supported our programs, and you donated supplies for our domestic violence programs. It's a pleasure this morning to be able to thank those who have supported us and made our work possible, including friends like Grace and Bill Greger, Reverend Sheldon and Molly Bennett, Margaret Fitzgerald and Mark Comstock, and Joanne Quaz. I want to thank them all. So this morning, I wanted to share a trip that I took in September to the Canadian Rockies. Has anybody been to the Canadian Rockies? Yeah. I took it as I was reflecting on 10 years at the Urban Ministry. This fall marked my decade at the Urban Ministry. I hiked in a stunning landscape, looking back at what I've learned in this work as I climbed up steep elevation, adjusting an awkward backpack, taking in views of glaciers and azure blue water. It wasn't easy going up. I bruised my toes coming down, but it was a wondrous trip. And I thought of how it was like the work for justice, bit by bit, sometimes hard and uncomfortable, and with unexpected gifts along the way. I looked back at arriving in Roxbury in November of 2014, when it became clear that the work before us was more than our programs. There was a core question beneath them. How would we address racism in Greater Boston? We're an historically white-led organization in the heart of Boston's historic African-American community, and we're encircled by mostly white Unitarian Universalist congregations who are reaching out to us to help make change. I was gripped by the challenge and also the potential, and how much I had to learn to get my arms around it. But before I could do that, before I could get my arms around it, I was called on to preach in pulpits like this. I brought no expertise that first season, no profound message. I brought my questions. What did it mean to be a white-led organization in Roxbury? How do we forge real relationships across difference? How do we make change that really matters? And I began simply listening, learning, following. In these 10 years, the police officers who killed Michael Brown were not indicted, sparking the Black Lives Matter movement. We witnessed the 2016 election and then the killing of George Floyd. White people were shaken out of a collective slumber. We learned that the waters of racism in the United States go deep. And the more that I've learned, the deeper those waters go. I first learned about health, wealth, and educational disparities that mean Black people live poorer and die sooner than white people. There is a 23-year difference in life expectancy in Roxbury and Whiteback Bay, just 1 mile away. And the waters went deeper still. I learned about the racism baked into the systems that birth those statistics, the prison, healthcare, and food systems. African Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of white people. Only half of African Americans have private health insurance versus 75% of white people, and 22% of Black people in the United States experience food insecurity, twice the rate of white people. And the deep waters grew colder. I learned how those systems are rooted in enslavement, how the police system grew out of slave patrols, how founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson were themselves enslavers whose economic well-being was secured through bondage, how after the Civil War, the prison system replaced enslavement as Blacks were charged with petty crimes and sentenced to hard labor, sometimes in the very same fields where plantations once stood. I learned that we cannot disentangle modern educational, housing, and economic systems from this history. Racism isn't a fistful of solvable problems. It is foundational. And to move forward in any meaningful way on our nation's and our region's social ailments, we must face it together. I packed a book on my trip to the Rockies. It was the book that we heard from earlier, The Sum of Us, by researcher Heather McGee. She began her research after the 2016 election when many of us were asking, why did people not vote in their own self-interest? Does anybody remember asking that question then or now? She looked at the racism that showed itself in the election and in our nation's political turmoil, and her thesis is this: our country's ongoing struggle for meaningful healthcare reform, positive economic change, even investment in infrastructure like roadways, our struggle to achieve collective good despite our abundant wealth and resources can be traced to enslavement. White people, McGee writes, have been conditioned to believe in a zero-sum equation. If people of color gain, they lose. And the stronger a person's racial resentment, the likelier to reject policies and investments that benefit all of us, including themselves. McGee asserts that etched deeply into white psyche is a value placed on whiteness. And when whites see Black people in the swimming pool, they'd rather not have a pool than to be in it with them and erase the status conferred by whiteness. And it is this deep-seated disfigurement of the white psyche that billionaire titans and political tacticians lean into with racist dog whistles to keep us separated and to maintain their power and control. It especially harms people of color, and that cannot be overstated, but it also doesn't serve any of us except for a very few at the top. McGee writes, quote, "Racism works against non-wealthy white Americans. It lowers their support for government actions that could help them economically out of a zero-sum fear that it could help the racialized, undeserving as well," end quote. She draws a through line showing how this zero-sum thinking has collapsed unions that could advocate for all workers, and it's powered disinvestment in public services like higher education. When more students of color began attending college, she writes, public funding dried up. College students of color 40 years ago were just 1 in 6. Now they're near half. And parallel to that rise in BIPOC students came cuts to per-student funding. In the past 30 years, public college tuition has almost tripled. She posits that it's why states like Texas refuse Medicare expansion, refusing what's basically free federal funds that would mean all rural Texans would have better access to hospitals. The refusal is fear that expanding public health care would draw in and serve more people of color. Black people suffer the most from racism, but our whole human family is harmed. Solidarity, she says, is the answer. Solidarity is the answer. She quotes a longtime activist who she interviewed in her research, quote, "If we didn't have these sharp divisions based on race, we could make enormous progress in terms of making sure that people are not hurting as badly as they are or deprived of what clearly are the necessities of life." And she continues, quote, "Over the years that I have sought answers to why a fair economy is elusive, it has become clearer to me that how white people understand what's right and wrong about our diverse nation, who belongs and who deserves, is determining our collective course." That's the crux of it. Can we swim together in the same pool or not? She writes, "It's a political question, yes, and one with economic ramifications, but at its core, it's a moral question. And it's a question for us as people of faith. I no longer believe that we can advance justice in the United States in a meaningful way without dealing with the history of enslavement and its inherited racism, not in fighting climate change or fighting hunger. Racism cannot be separated from the rest of our social commitments because it is part and parcel of it. And that means that we must build connection and solidarity across race in Greater Boston. And in our segregated world and in our segregated city, that work can seem daunting. But as people of faith, let us not be daunted. We are simply called to begin. We are called to do what we can in as many ways as we can for as long as we can. After 10 years at the urban ministry, I still bring to your pulpit no more expertise than when I began this work. But what I have is the conviction that building relationships across race is foundational for all justice work. And I come with the same strategies as the year I arrived. To build real connections, those of us who are white need to listen and learn and follow. At the urban ministry, we listen to the community to guide us forward. In partnership with the Roxbury Historical Society, we began research into the history of enslavement by the congregation of First Church Roxbury, whose church and campus we inherited and inhabit. We published a report citing the names of 58 enslaved persons owned by First Church Roxbury congregants, with even the very first minister being an enslaver, and we asked Roxbury community members to guide us forward. Over the past year, neighbors have charted our course, seeking to learn more about the lives of those named in the report and to track their genealogy to find whether descendants are living in Roxbury today. It might seem that the urgency is confronting the racial injustices happening right now, and yes, that is important. But the Black community says this also matters. Historic truth-telling, making the past visible, and deeply honoring the lives of those who were dishonored by our religious ancestors. This matters urgently too. And we learn. For the past 5 years, we've held a series of webinar lectures called Community Conversations, in which we invite in BIPOC leaders to speak to the challenges facing the Black community in Boston. They've spoken on gentrification and displacement, educational inequity, the racial wealth gap, poor health outcomes. We learn for an ever-deepening understanding of past and present. And we've built a tours program led by local community members that highlights the history of the community that we stand in. These tours tell the story of public art in Nubian Square, how today's magnificent murals grew out of the work of graffiti artists that the city once targeted, or tell of the trees in John Eliot Square and how important and threatened the tree canopy is in urban space. BIPOC students in our after-school program design tours of the neighborhood, highlighting what matters most to them about their community, and they share these tours and stories with Unitarian Universalist youth who are visiting Boston from around the country. And we follow. Our work in partnership has deepened. When the NAACP asked us to fill a bus to go to an action in DC, we filled the bus. As the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute addresses violence in the city, we stand behind them, inviting congregations to join the Mother's Day Walk for Peace in Dorchester. When the housing advocacy program City Life asks us to stuff envelopes, we stuff envelopes. We build solidarity by showing up again and again in the spirit of listening and learning. When you enter the doors at the urban ministry, you see on an entry wall a quote by the Aboriginal activist Lila Watson, and it says, "If you are here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." These words resonate as a spiritual truth, but there's a very concrete truth here too that the sum of us reminds us, the truth that until we grapple with the history of enslavement and racism and bridge our divide and commit to working in solidarity, we will not be free, not any of us, of all that ails us. We need to work together. On my last long hike in the Canadian Rockies, we climbed up Larch Valley to Sentinel Pass, steadily making a 2,500 feet elevation gain to a stunning view, and then we began our descent. And as we descended, we came upon startled hikers warning that a grizzly bear was on the trail ahead. She was in a state of what is called hyperphagia, a trance-like focus on eating enough calories for winter. Our hike leaders reminded us of what is called for when faced with grave danger. Make noise, people, and stick together. And so we held close and began singing until we were safely through and the trail ended. That's what gets us through the hard and dangerous days ahead, friends. Let us sing loudly, reach out to the whole human family, and stick together. And amen. I invite you to stand and join with me in singing our closing hymn, Break Not the Circle.
That's 323 in your gray hymnal, Break Not the Circle.
Circle
Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. The words are in your order of service. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Go out remembering that you are sufficient for this day and for what lies ahead. Go forth knowing that you are called to be entirely who you are and entirely using the gifts that you already have. Go out in courage and in faith. Amen.